Welcome back to the BL Story Room. Before we dive into today's tale of power, pheromones, and the kind of defiance that burns bridges, I want to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you're a fan of Omegaverse stories where the Omega has a spine of steel, and the Alpha learns that true dominance is a choice, hit that subscribe button right now. Stay with us until the very last chapter. This story is for those who believe that love is the only thing worth breaking the rules for. Chapter 1. The air on the 42nd floor of Rowan Dynamics didn't smell like oxygen. It smelled like expensive cologne, cold filtered air, and the heavy, stifling weight of Alpha authority. Eli Voss stood at the back of the boardroom, his fingers digging into the edge of his tablet. He wasn't supposed to be noticed. As an Omega intern, his job description was simple. Take notes, fetch the coffee, and, above all, keep his scent suppressed. But Eli didn't believe in disappearing. He hadn't taken his suppressants that morning. He never did. While the other three Omegas in the room smelled like nothing, mere ghosts in tailored suits, Eli let his natural scent of rain-drenched citrus and ozone hum quietly under his skin. It was a small, dangerous rebellion in a building owned by Cale Rowan. At the head of the table, Cale was mid-sentence. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a storm held together by a three-piece suit. His scent, dark cedar and burnt sugar, didn't just fill the room, it commanded it. Every Alpha in the room had their heads slightly bowed. The acquisition of the Miller firm is a waste of capital, Cale said. His voice was a low, melodic rasp that made the hair on the back of Eli's neck stand up. They're failing. We absorb them, we sync with them. Close the file. The room went silent. The senior VPs nodded like clockwork. Actually, Eli's voice cracked the silence. Every head turned. The VPs looked horrified. The lead Alpha of the marketing team hissed. Voss, shut it. Cale Rowan didn't look up from his papers at first. He just paused, his gold fountain pen hovering over a contract. Then slowly, he raised his head. His eyes were the color of slate, cold gray, and impossibly sharp. Did someone speak? Cale asked. It wasn't a question. It was a warning. Eli felt his heart thundering against his ribs, a wild, frantic rhythm. His inner Omega was screaming at him to look at the floor, to bare his throat, to apologize. Instead, Eli took a step forward, his boots clicking loudly on the polished marble. I said actually, Eli repeated, his voice steadier now. Miller isn't failing because of their product. They're failing because their current leadership is suppressing their Omega researchers. They have 3 patents pending that would revolutionize our tech sector, but they're being held back by the same optics policy we use here. If you buy them and put an Omega in charge of that department, you don't sink. You fly. The silence that followed was suffocating. Eli could feel Cale's gaze crawling over him, heavy and intrusive. It wasn't just a look, it was a physical weight. Cale's scent flared, the burnt sugar sharpening into something smoky and aggressive. He was testing Eli, pushing his pheromones out like a tidal wave to see if the intern would crumble. Eli felt the heat rise in his cheeks, his own scent of citrus sharpening in response, clashing against the cedar in the air. He didn't bow. He didn't look away. He stared directly into Cale Rowan's eyes, refusing to be the first to blink. Cale stood up. He was tall, broader than he looked while sitting, and the sheer gravity of his presence made the VPs scramble back. He walked down the length of the table, his movements slow and predatory, until he was standing inches from Eli. He was so close Eli could see the faint silver flecks in his grey eyes. He could feel the heat radiating off Cale's body. The Alpha didn't touch him, but he leaned in, his shadow swallowing Eli whole. You're an intern, Cale whispered. The sound was for Eli's ears only. And you're an Omega who thinks he's a lion. I don't think I'm anything, Eli shot back, his breath hitching as he inhaled the intoxicating, dark scent of the man in front of him. I just know how to read a balance sheet better than your VPs. Cale didn't snarl. He didn't fire him. Instead, a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk touched the corner of his mouth. It was the most terrifying thing Eli had ever seen. Mr. Miller, Cale called out, not breaking eye contact with Eli. Yes, sir, the VP stammered. Transfer Voss to my personal team. Starting tomorrow, he doesn't fetch coffee. He sits in my office. Cale leaned closer, his lips brushing the shell of Eli's ear. If you want to be heard, little bird, make sure you have something worth saying. Because if you waste my time, I won't just fire you. I'll make sure you're forgotten. Cale turned and walked out without another word. Eli stayed frozen, his knees finally beginning to shake. The air was still thick with the scent of cedar and citrus, a violent, beautiful mess that told everyone in the room one thing. The game had just begun. Chapter 2. Eli's new workspace wasn't a cubicle. It wasn't even a desk in the hallway. It was a glass-topped table situated exactly 4 feet away from Cale Rowan's massive mahogany desk, right inside the CEO's private office. It was a cage made of floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive air. "Sit," Cale said without looking up from his monitor when Eli walked in at 8 a.m. The office smelled overwhelmingly of Cale. In the boardroom, his scent had been a weapon. Here, in the quiet of his private sanctum, it was a thick, velvet blanket of cedar and something darker, like a forest after a fire. It sat in the back of Eli's throat, making his mouth go dry. "I have my own department's reports to finish," Eli said, remaining standing. He clutched his laptop bag like a shield. "I can do that from the intern pool." "You're not in the pool anymore," Cale replied. He finally looked up. He had shed his suit jacket, his white sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were corded with muscle and dusted with dark hair. He looked less like a businessman and more like a predator taking a break. "You're under my direct supervision, which means I see everything you do. I hear every word you say, and I smell every thought you have." Cale's eyes drifted to the base of Eli's throat, where his pulse was visible, hammering away. "You still haven't taken your suppressants." "It's not against company policy," Eli snapped, finally sitting down because his legs were beginning to feel like jelly. "The handbook says suppressants are highly encouraged for a professional atmosphere. It doesn't say mandatory. I'm professional. My work is professional." "Your scent is a distraction," Cale said, his voice dropping an octave. He leaned back, his chair creaking. "It's aggressive. It doesn't know its place. Maybe you're just not used to an Omega who doesn't smell like vanilla and apology," Eli countered. He opened his laptop, his fingers trembling slightly as he pulled up the Miller firm's data. He could feel Cale watching him. It wasn't the look of a boss checking on an employee. It was the way a scientist watched a chemical reaction that might explode. It was surveillance, plain and simple. Cale wanted to break him. He wanted Eli to get so uncomfortable, so overwhelmed by the alpha pressure, that he'd finally bow his head and beg for a desk in the basement. Hours passed in a grueling, heavy silence. The only sounds were the hum of the AC and the click of keys. But the air was alive. Every time Eli moved, he caught a fresh waft of Cale's scent. Every time Cale shifted, Eli felt the alpha's presence expand, pushing against his boundaries. Around 2 p.m., Eli's concentration broke. He had been staring at the same line of code for 20 minutes. The lack of food and the constant mental strain of resisting Cale's dominance were taking a toll. He rubbed his eyes, letting out a frustrated sigh. "You're stuck," Cale's voice cut through the quiet. "I'm fine," Eli lied. Suddenly, Cale was there. He hadn't made a sound, but he was standing right behind Eli's chair. The heat coming off him was immense. Eli froze, his breath hitching. He could smell the burnt sugar in Cale's scent. It was sweeter now, more concentrated. Cale leaned over Eli's shoulder to look at the screen. He didn't touch him, but his chest was inches from Eli's back. One of Cale's hands rested on the back of the chair, and the other hovered near the mouse. Eli was trapped between Cale and the desk. "The logic is flawed in the 3rd paragraph," Cale murmured. His breath fanned over Eli's ear, hot and steady. "You're trying to force the data to fit the conclusion. Look at the raw numbers." Eli couldn't look at numbers. All he could feel was the sheer, terrifying proximity of the man. Cale's scent was pouring over him, thick and intoxicating. It felt like being submerged in warm water. Eli's inner Omega hummed, a traitorous little vibration in his chest that wanted to lean back, to let Cale take the weight. I see it," Eli whispered. He tried to move his hand to the mouse, but his fingers brushed against Cale's. The contact was electric. It wasn't a spark, it was a jolt that went straight to Eli's gut. Cale didn't pull away. His hand stayed there, his skin rough and warm against Eli's. Eli looked up, his head tilting back instinctively. Cale was looking down at him. The alpha's face was a mask of intense control, but his eyes, they were dark, the pupils blown wide. He was breathing deeper now, taking in Eli's citrus scent as if he were starving. For a second, the office vanished. There was no company, no internship, no rules. There was just the pulse of two people who were supposed to be enemies, vibrating on the same dangerous frequency. Cale's gaze dropped to Eli's lips, and for a heartbeat, Eli thought, he's going to do it. He's going to claim me right here on the glass. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it made his skin itch with a sudden, desperate need. Cale suddenly pulled back. The loss of heat was so abrupt Eli almost gasped. Cale walked back to his desk, his movements slightly more rigid than before. He picked up a pen, his knuckles white. "Fix the report, Voss," Cale said, his voice harsh and cold again. "And put some windows open. It's getting stifling in here." Eli stared at his screen, his heart a frantic mess. He knew what that was. It wasn't mentorship. It wasn't even control. It was a hunger that Cale Rowan was barely keeping behind bars. And Eli realized, with a sinking feeling in his stomach, that he wasn't just a lion. He was the bait. Chapter 3. By the second week, the air in the executive suite had turned into a literal battlefield. It wasn't about words anymore. It was about pheromones. Rowan Dynamics was a place where alphas didn't have to speak to command. They just expanded their presence, a silent pressure that made everyone else tuck their chins and move faster. But Eli was a glitch in their perfect, quiet system. Every morning, he walked into Cale's office, sat at his glass desk, and let his scent of rain-drenched citrus fill the corners Cale hadn't claimed yet. It was exhausting. It felt like living inside a storm cell. "You're doing it on purpose," Cale said late one Tuesday evening. The sun had dipped below the Manhattan skyline, turning the office into a cavern of orange and deep purple shadows. Eli didn't look up from his spreadsheet. "Doing what, Mr. Rowan?" "Projecting." Cale stood up and paced the length of the room. He looked restless, his usual composure frayed at the edges. Most Omegas have the decency to quiet their scent when an alpha is working. You're loud. It's like you're trying to start a fight with the very air I breathe." Eli finally leaned back, his neck aching. "I'm not projecting anything. I'm just existing. If my existence is a fight for you, maybe the problem isn't my scent. Maybe it's your need to own every inch of this room." Cale stopped pacing. He turned, his silhouette sharp against the window. "You think I want to own you?" The question was a trap. Eli felt the familiar spark of heat in his gut. That dangerous, addictive friction that happened whenever Cale looked at him like he was a puzzle he wanted to smash. "I think you don't know what to do with something you can't control," Eli said softly. Cale moved. He didn't walk. He closed the distance with a predatory efficiency that had Eli's heart climbing into his throat. He stopped right at the edge of Eli's desk, leaning down so their faces were level. The scent of burnt sugar was overwhelming. It was thick, almost cloying, like a physical hand pressing against Eli's chest. It was the scent of an alpha exerting total dominance. Usually, this was when an Omega's instincts would kick in. The knees would weaken. The eyes would drop. The body would practically beg for the pressure to stop. Eli felt the weight of it. His skin felt too tight, his blood rushing hot through his veins. But he didn't bow. He leaned in. He inhaled deeply, drawing Cale's aggressive scent into his lungs, as if it were oxygen he desperately needed. He let his own scent flare, not in a plea for mercy, but in a sharp, acidic challenge. Citrus and ozone met cedar and smoke, clashing in the air between them like static electricity. "Is that it?" Eli challenged, his voice a mere whisper. "Are you trying to make me sit on the floor, Cale? Are you waiting for me to apologize for being an Omega?" Cale's jaw tightened, so hard a muscle pulsed in his cheek. His eyes were dark, searching Eli's face with a desperate, angry intensity. His gaze dropped to Eli's mouth, then back up. "I don't want you on the floor," Cale hissed. He reached out, his hand hovering near Eli's neck. He didn't touch the skin, but Eli could feel the heat radiating from his palm. The air between them felt like it was humming, a low-frequency vibration that made Eli's teeth ache. Cale's fingers brushed the collar of Eli's shirt, the movement agonizingly slow. The friction of the fabric against Eli's skin felt like a brand. Eli's breath hitched, a soft, broken sound that seemed to shatter Cale's remaining restraint. Cale grabbed the edge of Eli's desk, his knuckles turning white. He was shaking. The most powerful man in the building was trembling because he was trying so hard not to grab the intern by the throat and kiss him until neither of them could breathe. "You're a distraction," Cale choked out. You're a liability to this company's focus. Then fire me, Eli dared him. Send me back to the pool. Give me a boss who isn't obsessed with the way I smell. Cale let out a sound, half laugh, half growl. I can't. Why? Because if you're out of my sight for 5 minutes, I spend the next 10 wondering who's looking at you. Wondering if some other alpha is stupid enough to think he can handle the storm you carry. Cale straightened up, pulling his hand away, as if Eli's collar had burned him. He turned his back, staring out at the city lights. Go home, Voss, Cale said, his voice flat and drained of emotion. Before I forget that I'm your boss. Eli stood, his legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. He packed his bag in a daze, the scent of the clash still clinging to his clothes. He walked to the door, but paused with his hand on the handle. He looked back at the man standing alone in the dark office. Cale looked untouchable, a king on a glass throne. But for the first time, Eli realized the throne was a cage. Cale wasn't just controlling Eli. He was a slave to his own discipline. See you tomorrow, Mr. Rowan, Eli said. He didn't wait for a reply. He stepped out into the hallway, his heart finally slowing down. He felt a strange, bittersweet ache in his chest. He had won the round, he hadn't submitted. But as he stepped into the elevator, he realized that the more he resisted Cale's dominance, the more he felt himself becoming addicted to the heat of the fire. Chapter 4. The coffee in the break room tasted like battery acid and broken dreams. Eli leaned against the cold marble counter, his forehead pressed against the cabinet. It was 11:45 p.m. The office was a tomb of glass and shadows, illuminated only by the flickering streetlights of Manhattan 40 floors below. He felt wrong. It wasn't just the exhaustion of the 18-hour days Cale had been pushing. There was a strange, syrupy thickness in his blood. His skin felt a size too small, and every time he moved, a wave of heat rolled from the base of his spine to the tips of his ears. It's too early, Eli thought, his breath coming in short, shallow hitches. My cycle isn't for another 3 weeks. But nature didn't care about calendars, and it certainly didn't care about Rowan Dynamics' corporate policy. Stress, proximity, and the constant, violent clashing of sense with Cale had finally triggered something irreversible. Voss, where is the mill evaluation? Cale's voice echoed down the hall. A moment later, he appeared in the doorway of the break room. He had discarded his tie hours ago, and his top 2 buttons were undone. He looked tired, but the moment his eyes landed on Eli, his entire posture changed. Cale's nostrils flared. The air in the small room suddenly transformed. Eli's scent, usually a sharp, defiant citrus, had turned into something heavy and sweet, like oranges rotting in the sun, dripping with honey. It was the undeniable, primal signal of an omega in heat. Eli, Cale said. His voice wasn't a question. It was a low, vibrating growl that vibrated right through Eli's chest. I'm fine, Eli gasped, trying to push off the counter. His knees buckled immediately. Cale was across the room in a heartbeat. He didn't grab him, but he blocked Eli's path, his arms bracing against the counters on either side of Eli's hips. He didn't touch him, but the proximity was a physical blow. Cale's scent, that dark, smoky cedar, tripled in intensity, responding to the invitation. Eli's body was unintentionally screaming. You're in heat, Cale hissed. His eyes were no longer grey. They were almost black, the pupils swallowing the irises. The protocol. I have to call the medical floor. They'll fetch your emergency suppressants and transport you home. No, Eli whispered, clutching Cale's forearms to stay upright. Cale's skin was burning hot. No medical. If they log a heat incident during my internship, it goes on my permanent record. I'll never get a senior position. They'll say I'm biologically unstable. Eli's head fell forward, his brow resting against Cale's collarbone. He could hear the alpha's heart, a heavy, thudding rhythm that matched his own. Eli's body was beginning to ache, a deep, hollow yearning that only one thing could fill. His inner omega was clawing at the back of his mind, begging him to tilt his head, to offer his neck, to ask for the bite that would end the fever. Cale's breath was ragged. He was shaking, a fine, violent tremor in his arms. Eli, look at me. Eli looked up. Cale's face was a mask of agony. His jaw was set, so tight it looked like it might shatter. I can smell it, Cale groaned, his voice breaking. I can smell how much you want me to end this. One mark, Eli. That's all it would take. I could claim you right here on this floor, and no one would ever question your place again because you'd be mine. Cale's hand moved, his thumb brushing the sensitive skin of Eli's scent gland on his neck. The touch was like fire meeting gasoline. Eli let out a soft, broken whimper, his eyes fluttering shut. He leaned into the touch, his body arching instinctively toward the alpha's heat. The tension was so thick it felt like it might snap and draw blood. Cale's fingers curled, his nails grazing Eli's skin. For a second, Eli felt the ghost of teeth against his neck. The promise of a claim that would solve everything and ruin everything at the same time. Then, Cale pulled his hand away. He didn't back up, but he stopped touching. He stood there, his chest heaving, his eyes fixed on Eli's with a devastating, mournful kind of clarity. "I won't do it," Cale said, the words sounding like they were being torn out of his throat. "Cale." Eli's voice was a plea he didn't recognize. "No. If I mark you now while you're like this, it's not a choice. It's a reaction. You've spent every day in that office telling me you won't bow. If I take you now, I'm just proving everyone right. I'm proving that you're just a biological machine that can be mastered." Cale reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his movements rigid and robotic. "I'm calling my private car. Not medical. You're going to my secondary apartment. It's quiet. It's secure. I'll leave you the keys and I'll stay at a hotel." Eli stared at him, his vision blurred by tears of frustration and a strange, overwhelming surge of affection. You're leaving me?" "I am saving you," Cale corrected, his voice dropping to a whisper. He leaned in, his lips hovering just a hair's breadth from Eli's forehead. He didn't kiss him, but the intent was there, a heavy, ghost-like pressure. "When this fever breaks, Eli, when you can look at me without the fog in your head, if you still want me then, I'll be waiting. But I won't claim a man who isn't in his right mind to choose me back." Cale stepped back, the loss of his heat making Eli shiver. The alpha turned his back, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "The car is downstairs in 3 minutes, Cale said, his voice cold again, though it lacked its usual bite. "Move, Voss, before I lose my mind and prove I'm exactly the monster you think I am." Eli stumbled toward the door, his heart aching more than his body. He had expected dominance. He had expected the alpha to take what was offered. He hadn't expected the one thing that was harder to fight than power. Respect. Chapter 5. The apartment didn't look like Cale. It was softer, tucked away in a pre-war building in Chelsea, far from the cold glass towers of the financial district. There were real books on the shelves, worn at the edges, and a velvet sofa that looked like it had actually been sat in. But it smelled like him. Eli sat on the edge of the unmade bed, his head in his hands. The heat had finally broken that morning, leaving him feeling hollowed out and sensitive, like his skin was a second too thin for his body. He was wearing one of Cale's t-shirts, the only clean thing he could find in the closet. It was huge on him, the hem reaching his mid-thigh, and every time he moved, the scent of cedar and old paper wrapped around his shoulders. The lock clicked. Eli's heart did a slow, painful roll in his chest. Cale walked in carrying a bag of groceries and a stack of mail. He stopped dead when he saw Eli standing in the kitchen doorway. Cale looked like he hadn't slept in the 3 days he'd been gone. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hair, usually plastered into place, was messy. His gaze dropped to the t-shirt Eli was wearing, and for a second, the alpha's composure shattered. His throat worked as he swallowed hard, his eyes darkening with a hunger that made Eli's knees feel like water. "You're awake," Cale said. His voice was gravelly, raw. "You stayed away," Eli said softly. "You really stayed at a hotel." Cale set the groceries on the counter, his movements jerky. "I told you I would. I don't break my word, Eli." "Why?" Eli took a step forward, the floorboards creaking under his bare feet. "Most alphas would have used that as a chance to tie me to them forever. You could have had everything you wanted. You could have ended the fight." Cale turned, leaning his lower back against the counter. He watched Eli approach, his body tense, like a spring coiled too tight. "Is that what you think I want? A prisoner? Someone who only stays because their biology was hijacked?" He shook his head, a small, bitter smile tugging at his lips. "I don't want your submission, Eli. I want you." The air in the small kitchen began to hum. It wasn't the aggressive, corporate dominance from the office. This was different. It was intimate. Heavy. The scent of rain and citrus from Eli, now calm and clear, mingled with the steady, warm cedar of Kale. Eli stopped just a foot away. He could see the faint stubble on Kale's jaw, the way his eyelashes cast long shadows on his cheekbones. The silence between them wasn't a void. It was a bridge. "The fever is gone," Eli whispered. He reached out, his fingers trembling as he touched the pulse point on Kale's wrist. Kale's skin was electric. "I'm in my right mind now. And I'm still here. I didn't run away." Kale's breath hitched. He reached out, his hand hovering over Eli's waist before finally settling there, his thumb hooking into the fabric of the oversized shirt. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent a shockwave through Eli's system. "You should go," Kale groaned, even as he pulled Eli an inch closer. "The board is meeting on Monday. Things are going to get ugly. If you're seen with me outside the office, they'll use it to tear you apart." "Let them," Eli said. He looked up, his eyes searching Kale's. "I've spent my whole life being told to be quiet, to be invisible. But when I'm with you, I feel like I'm finally standing in the light." Kale didn't answer with words. He couldn't. He leaned down, his forehead resting against Eli's. They stayed like that for a long time, just breathing each other in. Eli could hear the frantic, heavy thud of Kale's heart against his own chest. Then, Kale tilted his head, his lips brushing against Eli's cheek. It was a ghost of a touch, a question asked in the dark. Eli answered by tilting his chin up. When their lips finally met, it wasn't the explosion Eli had expected. It was a slow, deep ache. It tasted like coffee and longing. Kale's mouth was soft but demanding, his tongue tracing the line of Eli's lower lip with a reverence that made Eli's soul shudder. It was the feeling of a secret being told for the first time. Eli's hands found their way into Kale's hair, pulling him closer, desperate to close every millimeter of space between them. Kale let out a low, broken sound, a muffled growl of surrender, and his arms wrapped around Eli's waist, lifting him slightly, so he was pressed fully against the alpha's solid, warm body. The world outside the apartment, the corporate ladders, the scent suppressants, the prying eyes of the VPs, it all vanished. There was only the feeling of Kale's hands roaming over the small of Eli's back, the heat of their shared breath, and the way their scents finally stopped clashing and began to weave together into something new. Something permanent. Kale pulled back just a fraction, his lips swollen, his eyes shining with a vulnerability that broke Eli's heart. "If we do this," Kale whispered against his mouth, "there's no going back. I won't let you disappear, Eli. I'll fight the whole world to keep you beside me." Eli smiled, a small, defiant thing. "Good. I've been looking for a reason to break some rules." Chapter 6. The morning air back at Rowan Dynamics felt like a bucket of ice water. The warmth of Kale's apartment, the scent of his skin, and the memory of his mouth felt like a dream that was being systematically dismantled by the harsh fluorescent lights of the 42nd floor. Eli walked through the lobby, and for the first time, he felt the eyes. It wasn't just the usual alpha curiosity. It was a cold, sharp-edged scrutiny. The whispers didn't stop when he entered the elevator. They just got quieter, like the hiss of a snake. By the time he reached the executive suite, Kale was already gone. His office door was shut, and 3 men in charcoal suits, board members Eli had only seen in annual reports, were standing outside it like sentries. "Mr. Voss," one of them said. It was Arthur Sterling, the oldest alpha on the board, and a man who smelled like stale tobacco and mothballs. "You're late." "I was told my schedule was at the discretion of the CEO," Eli said, keeping his chin up, though his stomach was doing a slow, nauseous somersault. "The CEO's discretion is currently being questioned," Sterling replied. He stepped closer, his scent intentionally heavy and sour, trying to force Eli to step back. "Go to the small conference room. Now, don't make us call security to move an intern." Eli looked at Kale's closed door. He wanted to scream, to kick it down, to find the man who had held him with such reverence 48 hours ago. But he knew Kale's world. He knew that any sign of emotional instability from an Omega was blood in the water. He walked to the conference room. Inside, it wasn't a meeting, it was an interrogation. 5 board members sat across from him. On the table lay a folder. "We've received a report," Sterling began, tapping the folder with a liver-spotted hand. "An anonymous tip regarding a breach of professional atmosphere policy. Specifically, an unregistered Omega heat incident that occurred on-site last Thursday." Eli's heart stopped. He felt the blood drain from his face. "The break room." Someone must have smelled it. Someone must have seen Cale with him. The report states, Sterling continued, his voice dripping with mock concern, that CEO Cale Rowan not only failed to follow medical protocol, but actively used his position to hide the incident. To remove an Omega in a state of biological distress to a private residence. He didn't hide anything, Eli said, his voice shaking. He protected my career. If I'd gone to medical, you would have used it to disqualify my internship. He followed the spirit of the law, if not the letter. The letter is all that matters in a hostile takeover, Mr. Voss, a woman at the end of the table added. Our rivals at Sterling Apex are looking for any sign of weakness. A CEO who is compromised by an unbonded Omega? That's not just a policy breach. It's a liability. I'm not his liability, Eli hissed, leaning over the table. I'm the person who fixed your mill evaluation. I'm the one who found the patents your qualified alphas missed. You are a distraction, Sterling barked. And as of this moment, you are suspended, pending a full investigation into Cale Rowan's fitness to lead. If he wants to keep his chair, he'll have to sign a statement declaring that you coerced him during your instability. Or he can step down. Eli felt like the floor had opened up. Coerced? They wanted Cale to blame him. They wanted Cale to throw him under the bus to save his empire. And the worst part? Eli knew that's exactly what the corporate world expected. The door to the conference room swung open. Cale stood there. He looked perfect, suit jacket buttoned, hair slicked back, his center wall of impenetrable, cold cedar. He didn't look at Eli. Not once. Sterling, Cale said, his voice as sharp as a razor. The board meeting has been moved to the main hall. Now, we were just finishing with the boy, Sterling said, gesturing to Eli. He's a firebrand, Cale. But he's out. You know the rules. You can't let a scent like that cloud your judgment. Cale's eyes finally flicked to Eli. For a split second, the cold mask slipped. Eli saw the agony there, the same dark hunger and desperate protective rage he'd seen in the apartment. But then, Cale's gaze went flat again. Get out, Voss, Cale said. The words were a slap. Cale, Eli whispered. I said get out. Leave your badge on the desk. You're no longer authorized to be on this floor. Eli felt a tear prick his eye, but he refused to let it fall. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his plastic ID badge, and slammed it onto the glass table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. He walked past Cale, their shoulders brushing. In that tiny, fleeting contact, Eli felt Cale's hand twitch, as if he wanted to grab him, to hold him, to stop him from walking away. But he didn't. Eli didn't look back. He walked to the elevator, his chest feeling like it was being crushed by a giant's hand. He had trusted him. He had believed that Cale was different. But in the end, the Alpha had chosen the throne. As the elevator doors closed, Eli caught one last glimpse of Cale walking into the main boardroom, surrounded by the men who wanted to tear them both apart. Eli was alone, and for the first time in his life, his scent didn't smell like a challenge. It smelled like rain, cold, lonely, and defeated. Chapter 7. Eli didn't go to the subway. He couldn't. He stood on the sidewalk outside the Rowan Dynamics Tower, the biting Manhattan wind whipping his thin coat around his knees. He felt hollow, like someone had reached inside his chest and scooped out everything that made him Eli. He looked up at the 42nd floor. Somewhere up there, Cale was signing a piece of paper that called Eli a predator. A coercer. No, Eli whispered to the wind. I'm not letting it end like that. He wasn't going back for the job. He was going back because he refused to let Cale Rowan hide behind a lie. If Cale was going to ruin him, Eli wanted to look him in the eye while he did it. He pushed back through the revolving doors. The security guard, a man Eli had shared donuts with for 3 months, looked away, his face full of pity. Eli didn't care. He bypassed the main elevators and took the service lift, the one that smelled like floor wax and industrial grease. He reached the 42nd floor and heard the roar before the doors even opened. It wasn't a shouting roar. It was the sound of 100 alphas in a state of agitation, a low-frequency vibration that made the glass walls rattle. Eli followed the sound to the main boardroom. The double doors were slightly ajar, and the scent hitting the hallway was foul. It was the smell of old alphas marking their territory, thick and suffocating. Eli pushed the doors open. The room was packed. The entire board, the top VPs, and legal counsel were all gathered around the long table. Cale stood at the head, a fountain pen in his hand. Sterling was leaning over him, pointing at a document. "Sign it, Cale," Sterling urged, his voice oily. "Sign the declaration of coercion. We have the press release ready. We'll say the Omega manipulated your pheromones during a vulnerable state. You keep the CEO title, the stocks stay stable, and the boy, well, the boy is just an intern. He'll disappear." Cale didn't sign. He was staring at the paper, his face like granite. "Eli shouldn't have been in that room," Cale said, his voice quiet, but carrying to every corner. "Exactly," Sterling crowed. "He breached protocol." "No." Cale looked up, and his gaze landed right on Eli, who was standing in the doorway. The air in the room seemed to freeze. "He shouldn't have been in that room, because he's too good for it. He's better at this job than any of you." Eli's breath hitched. Cale dropped the pen. It clattered onto the glass table, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. He picked up the document, the lie that would have saved his career, and slowly, deliberately, he tore it in half. Then in quarters. "Cale!" Sterling shrieked. "What are you doing? That's your career. That's your legacy." "My legacy isn't a chair in a glass building," Cale said. He walked away from the head of the table. He walked past the shocked VPs and the fuming board members, straight toward Eli. As he moved, Cale did something he had never done in public. He let go. His scent, that dark, smoky cedar, exploded. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't the aggressive pressure he'd used in the office. It was a declaration. It was warm, protective, and so overwhelmingly him that Eli felt his knees tremble. Cale stopped in front of Eli. He didn't care that the cameras were likely rolling on someone's phone. He didn't care that the most powerful people in the city were watching. He reached out, his hand cupping Eli's jaw. His thumb brushed over Eli's cheekbone with an aching tenderness. "I told you I wouldn't let you disappear," Cale whispered, his grey eyes burning with a raw, honest light. "I'm sorry it took me 20 minutes to find the right words." "Cale, the board." Eli started, his voice breaking. "The board can rot," Cale said. He leaned in, his movements slow and purposeful. He didn't go for Eli's lips. Instead, he tilted Eli's head back, exposing the sensitive, pale skin of his neck. Eli felt a jolt of pure, electric heat shoot through his body. Cale lowered his head. He didn't bite, not yet, but he pressed his nose against Eli's scent gland. He inhaled deeply, drawing in Eli's rain and citrus scent, and then he let out a low, vibrating purr that rumbled against Eli's skin. He was scenting him. In front of the whole world, Cale Rowan was marking an unstable Intern as his own. It was the most sensual thing Eli had ever felt. The heat of Cale's breath on his neck, the scrape of his stubble, and the heavy, possessive weight of his hands on Eli's waist. It felt like being claimed by the sun. Eli's inner Omega didn't just bow, it sang. He leaned his weight into Cale, his fingers clutching the Alpha's expensive suit, his eyes fluttering shut as a wave of peace washed over him. Cale pulled back just enough to look Eli in the eye. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his own CEO badge, the one that gave him keys to the empire. He pressed it into Eli's hand. "They want to talk about leadership?" Cale said, turning to the board while keeping one arm firmly around Eli's shoulders. "This is Eli Voss. He's the most brilliant analyst I've ever met. And he's my partner. If you want me in that chair, you take him, too. On the executive floor. With a full salary and a seat at this table." Sterling was purple with rage. "You can't claim an intern in the middle of a takeover." "I just did," Cale said. He looked down at Eli, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through his mask. "And if you don't like it, I hear the Miller firm is looking for a new CEO. I think we'd look great in their building." The room erupted into chaos, but Eli didn't hear a word of it. He was looking at Cale, at the man who had chosen restraint when Eli was weak, and who had chosen vulnerability when the world demanded he be cold. "You're going to lose a lot of money," Eli whispered, leaning his head against Cale's shoulder. "I've got plenty of money," Cale murmured, his lips brushing Eli's temple. "I was running out of things worth spending it on. Until you." Cale led him out of the boardroom, his hand never leaving the small of Eli's back. They walked through the office, past the stunned employees and the buzzing phones, and out into the crisp Manhattan air. The wind was still cold, but as Cale laced his fingers through Eli's and pulled him toward the waiting car, Eli didn't shiver. He was finally home. And that, dear listeners, is where our story ends. Not with a whimper, but with a claim that changed everything. Thank you for staying with us until the very last line here at the BL Story Room. If you felt the heat between Kale and Eli, if you cheered when that board of directors finally got what was coming to them, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you never miss a moment of the tension, the drama, and the slow burn love stories that make your chest ache. Until next time, keep choosing the ones who stand beside you. Good night.